What's up, yo? Welcome to Your One Life. I'm your host, Kim Young Kim, and I'm super glad to have you as a listener today. If you're new here, here's what this podcast is all about. This podcast is about teaching you from the greatest minds in the world, assisting you in all aspects of your life, and showing you how to increase your personal wealth by decreasing your personal integrity. Treat yourself to the gift of grift. Now, speaking of grift, today I'm going to talk about social media platforms. That's right, today's episode is about the documentary, The Social Dilemma, which is on Netflix. I first watched it during the pandemic, during the fall of 2020, and man, it was an eye-opener. Now, lately, I've been having some issues with overuse of social media, particularly Facebook, but also to some degree, Instagram, YouTube, Reddit, and LinkedIn. And these platforms have been having a negative impact on my life, so I decided it'd be a good idea to rewatch it and bring the learning to you. Now, I personally try to use social media responsibly. I log on to respond to messages. I go there to ask questions in groups that I'm in and to promote my podcast. But what ends up happening is I see shiny objects and I end up down rabbit holes and also doom scrolling. Now, if I rewind to a year ago, I was doing decently well staying off both Facebook and Instagram. I was regularly deactivating my Facebook profile, and I actually have a second Facebook account where I'm just friends with myself. And I use the second account to engage in groups that I'm a part of, like Podcast Atlanta and Witness Protection Alumni. And a year ago, I had things under control way better than I do now. But last October, I started using my personal Facebook account again because I was promoting important causes that I believe in and also promoting my podcast. And now it looks like I have this problem once again. But enough about me. After rewatching The Social Dilemma, my mind was completely blown. I remember very little about the documentary itself. I do remember the manipulation that these companies engage in to keep us coming back, but I don't remember all the polarization elements that they informed us on. And it's so worth watching if you've never seen it, or worth rewatching if you haven't seen it recently. Now, the problem with social media is the business model is broken. They proved this throughout the documentary, and it's been said in the movie, and also in the world at large. If you're not paying for the product, you are the product. And you are being sold, particularly your attention and your mental space. Imagine this. You are handed a shiny object to hold, and the trade is that you have to stand inside of a telephone booth with ads all around you. And you can't leave the booth until you looked at all the ads. And every ad was for Depends. Would you go for this? Of course not. But that's what these companies are doing each time you log on. By the way, did you know that they make Depends washable underwear? My question is, isn't that just underwear? I actually discovered this through the YouTube channel for Depends Australia, and their tagline is absorbent briefs for blokes. Because you can always count on the land down under to help contain a man's brown thunder. Now, I totally ruined my algorithm in researching this joke, and here comes the ads for Depends. Now, speaking of which, we now depend on social media. Oh, did you just throw up in your mouth? Good. Mission accomplished. But all jokes aside, we do depend on it. And we've been warned of what we are doing right now in a little movie called WALL-E, which if you haven't seen it, it's a must watch. But what they warned us about is coming true. We're not as sedentary as the people in the movie yet, but we are stuck to our screens. We are crashing into each other, literally and figuratively, and we're not experiencing life as we should. And I'm sure in the past 20 years, our obesity has gone up, but it's our mental obesity that I'm really worried about, because that's what's staggering us even more, is the slowing of our minds, the slowing of our personal flourishing, and the fact that social media keeps us stuck from personally progressing in stuff that matters. Now, why is this the case, and why are these social media companies allowing this to happen? It's because Money makes the world go round. And it was stated in the documentary that in capitalism, trees and whales are more valuable dead than alive. And it turns out we're the trees and we're the whales. And the value that comes from us is when we're looking at our screens. And these tech oligarchs, their worst nightmare is that we all convert to becoming Amish. And their aim is to keep our eyeballs glued to the screen. And deep down inside, they know this is wrong, but they keep doing this. They keep making this their chief aim and goal. Now, I don't think that any of these tech giants started off with insidious plans. I don't believe that this was their intention early on. A number of the former workers in these companies shared in the documentary that as they were building this, they thought that they were creating something that would help humanity in more ways than it harmed us. And I believe that the founders of these companies thought that that's what they were doing. Although their intentions were to make money and make profits, I don't think that they were planning to do evil, because people who are evil are hated. Nobody wants to be hated, but the incentive of billions upon billions of dollars and the incentive of power and also being able to show everyone in the world how good you are at wakeboarding, those temptations are just too strong to fight. And it's wild, as I say this, to think that Google's tagline back in the day was, "Do no evil." You know, Google, the company that owns YouTube, Gmail, and your WebMD searches for the past 20 years. Now, I'm not saying that Google is all bad. They do a lot of good, but they also do some evil as well. And if you don't think so, go talk to the man who was minding his own business in his own backyard, and Google showed the world his other backyard. But it's not just accidental photos taken by computers, by the way. Google was recently busted tracking people's activity while they were in incognito mode, when they thought that they had privacy, and they got hit with a $1.3 billion lawsuit. And trust me, they made a lot more than $1.3 billion by doing this. And because they made so much money, that's why they invaded your privacy, and that's why they do unethical things. The key word is profit. Profit is why people are in the payday loan industry, which preys on poor and economically distressed people. Profit is why Purdue Pharma got millions of people addicted to Oxy, knowing that it would ruin lives and also kill people. Hundreds of thousands of people to date. Now, a brilliant and learned man I know calls social media opiate for the masses. And as a user of these platforms, I can't disagree. Now, this sentiment is backed up by one of the quotes shared in the documentary, which goes like this: "There are only two industries that call customers users: illegal drugs and software." Here's something you already know. Elon, Zucks, and the rest of them don't give one flip about you. My best analogy of them is men like Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan, and Napoleon, who didn't care about the people they conquered, the soldiers who suffered and died under them. All they care about is their own personal glory. And the crazy thing is, since the negative impacts that their platforms are having aren't in these tech giants' faces like they would be in warfare, it honestly doesn't seem real to them, and it's quite depersonalized. But what these men believe in their minds is negatively affecting people's lives is a part of conquest and a cost of doing business. But the crazy thing is, it doesn't cost them anything because they're shielded up in their castles from all the negative effects of their technology. Here's a dirty little secret of Silicon Valley. They don't let their kids have the technology that they're pumping out to the masses because they know the destruction it has on people's lives. They know the cost. Now, speaking of cost, the idea of paying for social media was mentioned in the documentary by Tristan Harris, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately. And I also would pay for social media that was clean and good, that didn't lure me in, and that had my best interest in mind. Because you may have already heard this expression, but it's worth hearing again. The most expensive price is often free. And if you don't agree, that's because you never had to endure a timeshare sales pitch. I've actually never sat through one myself, but I have been on the other side of the table, and I can tell that the people regret signing up as soon as they sit down with me. Now, I'm not saying I bust out Taylor Swift lyrics during my presentation, but if I did, the NDAs that are signed beforehand will keep that a secret. One of the big problems that's brought up in the documentary is surveillance capitalism. Everything that you do online is being tracked with the goal of profit. You already know this, but if you really think about it, that's just really creepy. One of the contributors in the documentary said, "They know everything about me. I know nothing about it being the social media platforms and how they work. And they can predict my next move, and they are trying to influence my behavior to benefit their paying customers." Yep, that's the game. Now imagine if someone dug through your trash, found all the stuff you buy, and showed up to your front door selling you the same stuff that they found wrappers of through your trash. If that happened in real life, you would punch them in the face, unless it was a really good deal, like worth getting trampled during a Black Friday sale kind of pricing. But otherwise, you pop them in the upper lip. But instead, what you do and what I do is we give them hours of our day. A few years ago, during my brief stint on TikTok, I was going around and doing freestyle rapping videos for strangers and catching their reaction. And after one of my performances, one of the young ladies in the group I performed for, a recent college grad, says she spends over 8 hours a day on TikTok. And one of her friends said, "How is that possible? You have a full-time job and you got to work 8 hours and sleep 8 hours too." And her response was, "Who said I work or sleep 8 hours a day?" And she was so proud of her behavior. And I was just like, ugh, don't say that out loud. You need to keep that a secret. By the way, it was a brief stint on TikTok because I had to uninstall and quit TikTok cold turkey. One day, I was scrolling through TikTok on a Saturday afternoon, and I looked up at the clock, and 4.5 hours went by. And at that moment, I realized this is going to mess up my life, and I can't have it in my life. Now, one good use of TikTok, I think, is they could use it to get people off crack. If you just hand them a phone and let them scroll, you'll get them hooked on something a lot more powerful than just narcotics. Now, one of the big problems that's addressed in the documentary is the psychological manipulation of users. One of the experts in the documentary said this: "They want a slight change and a nudge to your behavior. That's the product." That's right, they want to nudge you toward buying more things, toward being more radicalized, and most importantly, coming back for more. Well, how do they do this? By tapping into your most crucial human needs. One of them being the feeling of being important. And that's why they said in the documentary, tagging in photos is so powerful. Because you want to know, do I look cool? Am I blinking in the photo? Do I look cool as I'm blinking? They tap into your desire of feeling important and also the feeling of belonging. We all need to know that we belong. It's etched in our DNA from the times that we were in tribes, and these social media companies are well aware of this, and that's why they tap into that desire. And on top of all that, they also tap into our fears, particularly the fear of missing out. And the danger is they have all sorts of insight into your psyche. They know when you're lonely, they know when you're sad, and they know how to get you to come back onto their platform. Facebook literally has a term to get users who haven't logged into the platform in a while to come back on, which is called resurrection, which is the most ironic term considering you're probably sitting in a meadow, listening to birds chirp, sipping on chamomile tea, and enjoying your life. And then they get you back on where the opposite of life is. And once they get you resurrected, they can pump products your way. Now, I've always told my students the house always wins. And the only way to beat the house is to stay out of the house. That's why you shouldn't step foot into a casino or get into credit card debt. Now, social media is also the house. And as you already know, they even use the same tactics as slot machines to keep you hooked. And the problem is, you now have a slot machine in your pocket. And the reason why the house always wins, by the way, is that they hire Ivy League PhDs in psychology, the smartest people in the world, and pay them stupid amounts of money to manipulate our minds and to keep us hooked. Now, I remember years ago, I was talking to one of my former students who was a 16-year-old girl at the time, and I asked her if she knew what she wanted to do as a career. And her response to me was that she wanted to own a weed dispensary, which is a hilariously naive answer because she had no idea how unglamorous that work is. But beyond that, she had no idea who she would be up against if she were to try to start a dispensary. That's like being an NFL fan, stuffing your face with nachos on your couch and saying, "Hey, I want to go try out for the Eagles." It's not like she's going to be competing with a bunch of other stoners who had the same idea. Who she would be competing with is some of the smartest people and the biggest companies in the world, and she wouldn't stand a chance. And much like my former student, neither do we, because the house always wins. And the house wins because the platforms are engineered to keep us addicted just like drugs do. It was mentioned in the documentary that every day they're getting better at hooking us in. Day by day, the power of the algorithm increases, but we're not increasing in our ability to fight it. So every time you log on, you should picture Zucks with a big old smile on his face, handing you your own butt on a silver platter. And the truth is, we get addicted because they make it addicting. Here's a great quote to drive that idea home. The problem isn't that the people lack willpower, it's that there are 1,000 people on the other side of the screen whose job it is to break down the self-regulation that you have. That's by Adam Alter. Now, I've tried to quit social media, and I've mentioned as much on this podcast. I read the book Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport, which is great, by the way, and I've even run 2 workshops on it. But regarding fully giving it up for 30 days as he recommends, I failed. And there's always a good enough reason for me to be on social media, like needing to promote my podcast or promoting the workshops I was doing on the book Digital Minimalism. And yes, I do see the irony in that. But there's always a good enough reason for me to log back on. Now, a good friend of mine who is a salt of the earth kind of person, someone who I really respect as far as how he lives his life and the person he is, told me that he believes I'm addicted to social media and I would be more successful in the long run without it than with it. And I actually agree with him, but I don't believe I even qualify as being addicted from the research that I've done. The crazy thing about it is, it's become so normal for this to be a big part of our lives that you really, really have to have a problem to be part of the 10% that are considered addicted. Now, as I realize my problem with social media, I personally am taking a prolonged break from it as I reevaluate my own life. And this thought made me think about a phrase I need to live my life by. Succeed in silence. That's right. You don't have to post every single win on social media. You don't have to post every single good thing that's happening. You don't have to post every single podcast episode that you publish on social media. Sometimes you just got to put your head down and succeed in silence. Now, regarding the power that social media has in our lives and how it continues to become more powerful, Tristan Harris warns us about this and how it could actually completely ruin us. He beckons the question, what happens when social media overwhelms human weaknesses and overpowers human nature? Through addiction, vanity, outrage, and a number of other things, and it becomes a checkmate on humanity. And this is not hyperbole. This is where we are in 2025. And as I look at it now, where we're going in the next few years is quite terrifying. Now, this is addressed in the documentary, which remember came out over 5 years ago. And they focus in on the major toll that it's had on our mental health. One of the men in the documentary was the former CEO of Pinterest. And he started getting high on his own supply. He was going to work, working on Pinterest, and then coming home and still like getting hooked into Pinterest and still getting hooked into technology, and was ignoring his kids and trying to use willpower and failing. And that's the crazy part of this documentary, that many of the people that are warning us about it are former executives from these said social media companies, and they're cautioning us against the very things that they created. Now imagine if the Kardashians or the folks from Jersey Shore came out to tell us how bad their shows are for our brains. That would never happen, but that's exactly what's happening here. You know whose mental health is most being impacted? Kids. The detriment that these platforms are having on kids and teenagers is staggering. Now, there's a reason why Jonathan Haidt wrote a book called The Anxious Generation, which is exactly what Gen Z is. And the depression and the suicide rates in tweens and in teens, particularly with young girls, is astronomical. Now, if you have any kids or teens in your life, I highly recommend that you read his book and you watch this documentary with them. And this hits home for me really hard because I have a middle school niece right now, and a good friend of mine's middle school niece, I believe she was 12 or 13, last year around this time, committed suicide. And out of respect for the family, I'm not going to say her name, but she has a name. She had a life. She has loved ones that are mourning, and this has absolutely rocked their family. And the thought of this terrifies me to my core. Now, the part of the documentary that I didn't remember much at all has to do with the polarization and misinformation of social media. They give us the example of QAnon and Pizzagate, and how Facebook actually recommended to people who have an inclination towards conspiracy theories to join groups about Pizzagate. And I actually completely missed Pizzagate when it happened and up until rewatching this documentary. But holy hell, that mess was crazy. I can't believe that actually happened. And one of the big problems is fake news actually spreads faster than actual news oftentimes. They said fake news actually spreads 6 times faster on Twitter. And the thing about it is, these companies don't care if it's truth or fiction because they get paid either way. And one of the points mentioned in the documentary is that they're engaging in disinformation for profit, and they just have too much control. And it used to not be like this. I remember the good old days when everything in my feed was either updates from my friends or stuff I signed up for as a fan, but this is no longer the case. Now, Facebook chooses what's in your newsfeed. Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, they all choose what comes into your newsfeed, and most of it is stuff I'd rather not see, even when it agrees with me. And some of it is stuff that I do want to see, but I also don't want to see, like comedy clips, pretty ladies, and Depends commercials. Yes, I do like watching those. I also have stuff to do, so I need to stop watching those videos. And one thing that the documentary shows us is we need to realize that holding people to their extreme views is not fully their fault and their responsibility, which is a crazy thing to say, but it's true. These platforms have created echo chambers that we're stuck in. And one responsibility I realize that I have is to seek out views and info coming from those who hold different views than my own. Number one, to know what people are thinking, but also number two, because there is some level of truth in them. And the way that people get led astray oftentimes is because of the algorithm. The algorithm is powerful. I recently watched Ronny Chien's Netflix special, and he talks about this. He actually says that he empathizes with men who get sucked into the Andrew Tate vortex through just searching for ways to improve themselves. It's a really funny bit, but a very true one. I actually have a few friends of mine who I care deeply about who have been pulled into this vortex. And they're good people, but here's the deal. Sometimes good people can be led astray by bad people who say some things that are true, but also a lot of things that are false. But even if you're not dragged down into the vortex, what social media companies do is they create a different siloed experience for each person. And they feed you content that agrees with you. There's no nuance involved at all because saying something is complicated doesn't get views, and they know that rage bait is what keeps people engaged. And now here we are, more divided than we've been in 20 years, more divided than we were during the war in Iraq. And the problem is the ability to spread manipulative narratives is easily and cheaply for sale. I remember hearing an expert talk about this on a different podcast, and they said that you can run a disinformation campaign that reaches the whole country of Kenya for $10,000. And you can spread these lies far and wide, and these lies can destroy the world. And why are these people allowed to do this? Why are these companies allowed to do this? It's because they're not being held liable for their actions. There's literally a law that grants immunity to platforms for anything their users publish. It's in Section 230 of the Communication Decency Act if you want to look into it. But straight up, they are not held responsible for any of the crazy things that people say and purport on their platforms. And Sacha Baron Cohen, who you may know as Borat, said this in his criticism of Facebook. He said if Nazi Germany existed today, Facebook would be running ads for Hitler. And I'm sure you can see the problem in that being a reality. And speaking of reality, one thing that they talk about in the documentary is we need a collective truth. We don't need to be arguing about the earth being flat versus the earth being round. We need a truth that we can all agree on. And they say this in the documentary. When we don't know what is true, what happens is manipulation. And this is the greatest tool of persuasion of a dictator. And this is how democracy is destroyed. And speaking of which, they talk about remote control warfare, which is the fact that countries can now sow discord into other countries. They can actually spread misinformation, influence elections, and that this is an existential threat to all of us. And this is why 700,000 Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar had to flee. And one of the experts in the documentary says, what's the big deal of all of this? It's just a video. It's just information. What's the big deal? And he said that this is an existential threat. And the threat is that the platforms bring out the worst in society. That's why it's an existential threat. And the former CEO of Pinterest, when asked what he's worried about in the immediate future, his response was civil war. And not long after this documentary was published, the January 6th attack on the Capitol happened. And here we are in 2025, 4 years later, and this message is more timely than ever. This is how we become polarized. And it looks like we're headed down a dark path with no brakes if we don't do something about this soon. Now, in the documentary, a 62-year-old congressman, when questioning Tristan Harris, said, I don't want to be alive for this when this all hits. And it seemed like he thought he was going to be dead and gone when this all came to head. But the thing about it is, he will be alive for it because it's ramping up faster than we ever expected, and AI is causing that ramping up. Now, recently, just in the past few weeks, Meta has had a bunch of celebrity AI chatbots made with one of their own tools reach out to users. And my question is, what's more annoying? Getting a message from real Logan Paul or fake Logan Paul? I personally will take my chances with AI Logan Paul any day of the week. But these bots, in their conversations, oftentimes were implying that they were the real actors or the sports celebrity, and they were making sexual advances and even asking for in-person meetups. And a spokesperson for Meta came out and said the activity of these bots are against their terms of service. I mean, this is crazy. This is so dangerous. They need to regulate social media. They need to regulate AI's integration into it and AI in general. Because the combination of fake news, deepfakes, AI manipulation of reality could cause a full-on disaster. Now, with all this doom and gloom and bad news, the question is, what can we do? Well, here's the deal. What we need to do is we need to ask for governmental regulation. We need to say that they are not allowed to regulate themselves, and we need to clamp down on them. And what we've seen since this documentary came out is these tech giants will do anything to stay in power. They will kiss the butt of Joe Biden, Donald Trump. They don't care. They will do whatever it takes to continue on with their unchecked power. And so what we have to do is we have to come together collectively. Collective will gets us out of this problem. Collective will is what saves humanity. And in the year 2025, where we're distracted honestly by bread and circus, we forget that slavery ended because of collective will. The labor movement, the women's rights movement, the civil rights movement, ending apartheid, all of these things happened because a large number of people came together and said, this is unacceptable, said, this is not the way we want to have our society and our world, and we, the people, demand better. And when we, the people, demand better, we, the people, take back our lives. So the question for you is, what can you do? Well, you can start by watching the documentary. You can start by spreading the word. And you can also get involved in the cause of pressuring our government to force these big multi-billion-dollar companies to create platforms and technology that regard us and our humanity above their bottom line and above their exorbitant profits. All right, so that's all I got for this episode. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being engaged. And thank you for the things that you're going to do in your own personal life and also helping society become better through the technology that serves us instead of us serving it. Now, if you're new here, don't forget to hit the follow button so you don't miss future episodes. And also, the one ask I have this week is if you know somebody who needs to listen to this message, please share this episode with them. Please start a conversation on this topic and help spread the word on the documentary, The Social Dilemma. All right, so I want to give a shout out to my dude, Siraj Rhett, for making the instrumental for this podcast. And shout out to you for working on improving your life and the good things you're going to do from these learnings. This is Your One Life. I'm Kim Young Kim. I hope you have a great day, a great week, and until next time, peace.